This week's sermon is sponsored by Deborah Olstein in memory of her father, Joseph Chaim, Zichrono Livracha. His name should be a blessing. The grandfather to Matthew and Henry Olstein. Moses fought his entire adult life, from the moment he saw an Egyptian taskmaster harassing an Israelite to the many, many times he interceded with God on behalf of the Israelites for being so intractable. Moses had to learn to fight. He didn't always know the best way to advance his project, as his anger sometimes got the best of him, smashing tablets, hitting rocks. This just made him human. And like the rest of us, his humanity prevented him from getting everything he wanted. At the end of the Parsha this week, God coaxes Moses to ascend Har Nevo, and he shares with him a vista that gave hope and comfort to Jews for 3,000 years. He saw with his own eyes the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah. This would be the end for him, his burial place. The final view itself is stunning, but more importantly, it pointed to something far greater than one man. The landscape suggested a new chapter for the Jewish people, a home, a nation, being sovereign, laws to guide us to create a moral order constructed from God's fingerprints. I've been thinking about this astonishing scene since Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Zichrona Livracha, passed away. Lauded as a prophet in her own time by my friend Lauren Holtzblatt, who eulogized her, Ginsburg brought us to the border of a promised land, but she herself could not enter. And what I mean by that is her life's work moved the dial in profound ways toward inclusion, and fought against discrimination based on sex. And there were many, many other achievements. But in the end, we are not actually living in that land. The law is the law, but society has not yet actualized those laws. Her class at Harvard Law School had 552 people, and of that group, only 9 women. She had to learn to fight, and as a woman, she suffered many indignities. At a dinner party, the dean of the law school asked the women how they could justify taking the spot of a man. Or the time that she was refused entrance to a library at Harvard because she was a woman. But these stories have become part of RBG's legend. But they were really just a small part of the story of discrimination and humiliation that women routinely suffered when they attempted to claim spaces outside of the home or the secretarial pool. Ginsburg became a pioneer in gender equality legislation, winning 5 such cases that she argued before the Supreme Court. Yet, unlike Moshe, she didn't really enter the land. It would be artificial to suggest that the values that drove her have been lived into being by the rest of society. Laws change because people like Ginsburg, driven by their understanding of morality, they persevere and they fight. And they fight and fight. And unlike Moses, Ginsburg didn't fight by smashing tablets or hitting rocks, but rather through brilliant legal scholarship, an economy of words, and an astute understanding of how to craft an argument that will be heard by those in power. Ruth Ann Deutsch, a clerk to Justice Ginsburg from 2007 to 2008, spoke of her approach to writing, which was get it right and keep it tight. She recalled, it meant an excruciating attention to every single word to make sure that there was no excess, that every word, every phrase, every paragraph in an opinion had a purpose. Sound familiar? This is how we understand Torah, and no more so than in our Parsha, which is actually in the form of a poem. Strangely, when the Torah says that Moshe wrote down this poem, our Mefarshim suggest that he's actually talking about the entire Torah. Like poetry, whose words are chosen because they're symbolic, they're intentional. The Torah itself must be interpreted and mined for its deeper meanings and significance. And this sheds some light on the end of the Parsha, which states, "Take to heart all of the words that I share with you. Ki lo davar reku mikem, ki hu chayechem." For this is not, these words are not an insignificant thing for you. They are your life. So as the Torah comes to an end, we're told to read it like poetry, to take its words to heart, to interpret them, to play with them, to understand their deeper meaning. Nothing is superfluous. The Torah is saying, be meticulous in understanding every jot and tittle. Every word, every phrase, every paragraph has a purpose. And this is not a trifling thing. Ki hu chayechem, because this is your life. And in this incredibly smart literary move, the Yerushalmi, the Talmud Yerushalmi, creates an entire midrash, a sermon, a homily, by merely adding one comma to our verse. Imreku mikem. If it is insignificant, mikem. It is your fault. It is your fault because you did not struggle, you did not labor to understand it, you did not fight and wrestle. Ruth Bader Ginsburg's life's work was creating new worlds through perfectly placed commas, through words that were more powerful than slamming tablets because they shattered glass ceilings and they created legal frameworks that empowered women to claim the dignity that had been withheld from them by a system that had codified misogyny. Now, that might sound hyperbolic to you, but I was thinking about when I told my daughter that her work paved the way, that RBG's work, Justice Ginsburg's work, paved the way for legislation that enabled women to have their own credit cards. She was astounded that in my lifetime, women could be denied credit because it was her husband's role to oversee and control her finances. She could not believe that. And as impactful as Justice Ginsburg was, like Moses, she died on top of this mountain overlooking a scene of promise but not quite reaching it. Our culture has not yet caught up to her legislation. Women continue to be harassed and intimidated in the workplace, and of course outside of the workplace as well. Based on data from the US Census Bureau in 2018, a woman working full-time, year-round, earned $10,194 less than her male counterpart. Now, if this wage gap were to remain unchanged, she would earn about $407,760 less than a man over the course of a 40-year career. It's almost $500,000. We see this same bias in the Jewish community as well. Women in the rabbinate continue to experience treatment that subtly demeans or devalues their work. And this often happens unconsciously. We're not even aware that we do this, right? How many times have I already heard, "Hi, Rabbi Schuck. Hi, Rabbi Sitkin. Hi, Rabbi Jessica." Sometimes it's less subtle, as women in the rabbinate are told that a congregant, really wants a male rabbi to officiate at a life cycle event because he feels strange about the concept of women rabbis. The list goes on. We have so much work to do. Moses dies on that mountain knowing that he did all he could to shape the future of his people. He gave them God's Torah. He knew that it held within it a soaring vision for what an ideal society could look like. Though he also knew that those ideals lived within the hidden meanings of the words in that text, awaiting our interpretation. He died, I imagine, knowing that he fought hard for a world that had to integrate new ideas that may have been legislated in that Torah, but not yet internalized by his people. Justice Ginsburg died on that same mountain. She died a hero to many, a small little giant, eviscerating legal opponents with her characteristic brilliance, fighting for women with words that created new worlds. She too died overlooking a society that could become what her legal work pointed to, a country in which women are treated equally, in which they need not compensate for their sex by outperforming their male counterparts, in which discrimination was buried with the legislation she paved the way for. The night that we learned of her death, I cuddled with my 8-year-old daughter in my arms, and she cried. She was one of her heroes. And I told my friend that in my work to make my daughter a feminist, we watched the documentary RBG about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's life 2 times. And she responded by telling me, you know, David, it's probably more important to watch that movie with your sons. Point well taken. Take to heart all of the words that I shared with you. Ki lo davar reku mikem, ki hu chayechem. For this is not an insignificant thing for you. It is your life. Moses taught us that every word in the Torah is itself a poem, elusive, symbolic, holding within it truths waiting to be unearthed, and we, his people, rose to the challenge, and for 3,000 years, we have been discovering those truths. Our lives have depended on this. I like to believe that is what he saw when he was on the mountain. Generations of Jews who would commit their lives to uncovering the deepest truths and values of the Torah that he gave us. Perhaps that is why he could die with his eyes undimmed. I hope that the same is true for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a great American hero, a champion of gender equality and human dignity, the first woman to lie in state in the U.S. Capitol, the first Jewish woman to lie in state in the U.S. Capitol, a woman who cultivated intense devotion in her clerks, over 100 of whom flew in to stand vigil with her body throughout these days, a woman who changed our lives with her words. I hope that we will live up to her vision for gender equality and respect. She knew that we had not yet entered that promised land, but it is your job and mine to turn her words over and over until they become our eyes, the way that we see the world and one another. We bid farewell to this path-marking justice, and as Jews with pride, we claim her legacy as part of our own, as we commit to continue down this path that she marked for us to blaze in her memory. Shabbat Shalom.